You've probably heard about DORA, not the cartoon, but the Digital Operational Resilience Act. It aims to mitigate the increasing digital operational risks and potential ICT-related incidents in the financial sector. In fact, before DORA, financial institutions in the European Union mainly managed operational risk by allocating capital, but didn't cover all aspects of resilience. Now, with this regulation, they also need to ensure digital operational resilience by managing ICT and third-party risks, by responding to incidents, and by conducting resilience testing. In this episode of TechTalk, the first of our technology and regulation season, we are joined by two specialists in regulatory compliance. Tom Deprins, Director in Global Financial Services Compliance at Microsoft, and Xiaoyi Fang, Senior Manager in Regulatory and Compliance Advisory Services at PwC Luxembourg. Together, we talk, among other things, about how organizations are preparing for DORA, especially service providers such as Microsoft, the challenges that come with enhancing digital resilience, as well as client expectations and needs, ultimately providing you with valuable insights into navigating the landscape of digital resilience. I'm your host, Carlos Santos, and this is Tech Talk. Technology made simple over a cup of coffee. So, grab your favorite beverage and let's dive right into it. Welcome to a new episode of Tech Talk. Today we're delving into the realm of the Digital Operations Resilience Act, more commonly known as DORA.
Indeed, and we're joined with two fascinating guests, Tom and Xiaoyi, to give us their insights on the topic. So, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So just to get things started, Xiaoyi and Tom, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and why you're here today?
Well, Tom, maybe you can start.
Sure. So, and apologies, I seem to suffer a little bit with my voice this morning. A tiny little bit of a cold anyway. I have a background in security and technology, so I've been working in SOX and have a very deeply technical background in the distant past, and then later I switched to an audit and cloud-related roles in the banking industry before joining Microsoft now about 6 years ago. So this is around my background, but now I'm part of a small but global team with just a few people addressing financial services compliance globally. Personally, for me, this means I'm located in Belgium, and we support financial services customers all around the world in their compliance journey. This means engaging mostly with 3 lines of defense, risk, compliance, legal functions, etc., but also with financial services regulators at a global level. We're addressing compliance in general, real gaps or perceived gaps around compliance. And some of this is, of course, driven by new regulation, and this brings us to the DORA topic.
What about you, Xiaoyi?
So I'm part of the regulatory compliance advisory services at the PwC Luxembourg. So I'm located in Luxembourg. And so I'm assisting our client in the daily basis about IT compliance matters. And of course, the upcoming regulation DORA is one of them. And as well, to let the market know, so a little bit the key messages from the regulators on these topics is also, I would say, one of the responsibility that we feel ourselves as well. So I'm very looking forward to having this conversation together with Tom, because we have been also asked a lot about the IT service providers, so including Microsoft, by our clients on their preparation on this regulation. So I'm looking forward for our podcast today.
We too are looking forward to the discussion. But before we get into the details, can you tell us or can you refresh the main objectives and ideas behind DORA?
Yes, of course. So as Carl already mentioned at the very beginning, DORA stands for Digital Operation Resilience Act. And so it is a new EU regulation officially introduced in January 2023 and directly applicable to the financial entities regulated in EU. So the main objectives is really to strengthen the resilience of our EU financial sector in this increasing digitalization and high connected financial ecosystem. What that means simply that being prepared for different IT risks, vulnerabilities, and the disruption that we are all exposed to. But most importantly, being conscious of the impact of all of this on the functioning of each individual entity, industry, and as well the EU market as a whole. So I think this is really the key message and the key objective of this regulation.
Great. So thanks for the reminder about DORA. Now maybe to start going into the details. Tom, you mentioned that you're working for Microsoft. So as a service provider, how does this regulation affect you at Microsoft?
Thank you. I think there will be three ways. So the most obvious one is that we will be designated as a critical third-party supplier. So this will be new from Microsoft, but it's quite clear. Some of the authorities have outspoken, allowed that Microsoft is on the top of the list of potential critical third parties to be supervised. So we're anticipating that we will be. The internal conversations are more about how to prepare for this in terms of either Microsoft 365, so this would be Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, and then at the other hand, our Azure services that are supporting really highly critical workloads for financial services, either as a third-party provider or in some cases also as a fourth-party provider for some ISV products, core banking products and the likes that would be running on Azure Cloud. So that's the really big one. Secondly to this, of course, DORA applies to banks as well. And so one element of that is the use of third-party outsourcing. So the compliance expectations of these financial service institutions towards Microsoft may be adjusted, may increase. So that is another element we anticipate. And then thirdly, and that would be a more, or I would say at a very different dimension, but of course, we would be willing to help these banks or financial institutions in addressing DORA compliance by our services and our products. And I think we may be talking a little bit more about that later on.
Xiaoyi, let's look into the Luxembourg market. How is it preparing for this upcoming regulation?
So maybe also reasoning a little bit what Tom just mentioned, all these products are also so all the services that Tom just mentioned are also used by our Lux market. So I think it makes also more sense about our conversation today for our audience. So overall, Lux market is actively preparing for this regulation. Despite we observe also a difference in the work approach, chosen. And by preparation, I mean some entities started also reaching out actively to their headquarters. Some of projects are leading by the group, and they also reach out to the service provider, including Microsoft if they are using some products, of course. And then some of them are starting right away with the gap assessment, which is also kind of expected by the regulator by this point in time. And even though we are still waiting for some final version of the regulated text by summer this year, on the other hand, our local regulator is also extremely supportive by providing advice regarding, the readiness preparation, how should this take, and then also emphasize on the compliance priorities as well. So all this, I would say, as I mentioned, overall, our local market, it's actively preparing for it.
Great. So we see there's already quite some support here and then some development, I would say, regarding DORA. Now, question for you, Tom. Can you also maybe share a bit with us how is Microsoft tackling DORA and getting ready for it?
Yes, of course. So, and by the way, DORA is only special in the way that it will lead to an oversight of Microsoft, but I will talk mostly about our general process when new regulation comes out. So there's DORA, but there's also non-active consultation going on in the UK. There's a lot of regulations such as on AI, think about AI Act, etc. And in general, we try to engage directly with regulators, and we've been doing that since 2012 in the financial services vertical, to build a strong relationship with these regulators, to know these on an individual basis, I'd say. And indirectly, it's the same thing. We work through various trade associations to engage long before any consultation comes out. So the idea is to listen to their concerns and really get a deep understanding of this, to engage with them on their thinking and share our perspective. And very often it is done together with customers on what good looks like in a regulation. We do this through summits and engagements. We've done this with CSSF as long as with other national competent authorities, with the ESAs, etc., for quite some time. And for us, this means thematically what we look for in DORA as well is that the regulation that comes out is technology neutral, it is risk-based, it is outcomes focused, it doesn't have any incompatibilities with regulations across other jurisdictions, because a lot of our customers operate across jurisdictions. It's an equal level playing field, so that there is no disadvantage for cloud versus on-premise software, etc. And so these are kind of the elements we would typically look for in a regulation. And generally, I think between regulators, customers, and Microsoft, we're generally on the same page. Sometimes there's conversations on the execution, but broadly, this is what we do. This is also what we've been doing around DORA. Once consultations come out, this then becomes a more technical conversation on how to implement this in practice, and this has some more detail-oriented topics around this. And then, of course, at the same time, when the consultations come out, or around that time, we start preparing internally within Microsoft. This means adjusting what is in the drafts, what is in the regulations, what is in the rules, and then either engage with our legal teams on our contracts and make some changes as necessary, or we engage with our engineering teams on adjusting our services, our products. For instance, with GDPR, this is a great example. The whole EU data boundary and moving services into Europe has really been driven through our engineering as an impact of some of these regulatory developments. And so we're looking forward to do similar things under DORA, but under DORA, we're not quite there yet. So the journey is still ongoing. I'll pause there.
So thank you, Tom, because this is also aligned with the approach that, as PwC, we have chosen. Really listen to our clients about the concern, the challenges. And then, of course, from the regulatory side, because as you already mentioned, that is in certain jurisdiction, they already have maybe some regulation, also including, the wording resilience. But despite the similarity, I would say the expectations are slightly different compared to DORA, because we already mentioned, I think previously, that the DORA requirements are much more prescriptive. And then as well, the ultimate goal is slightly different as well. And so this is the approach that we chosen also with our clients. So listen to them, listen to also, for instance, when the headquarters is outside of Luxembourg, it's just most of the cases. And then also being close to the regulator, so understand ultimate, expectation there, and helping our clients for the preparation. So I think we are quite aligned in terms of approach that I just explained.
We will talk a little bit more about clients' expectations later. But first, Tom, what are the main challenges and opportunities you are experiencing as a service provider in light of all that you've mentioned before?
Great question. So challenges, I will only name one, because we can have some technical conversations about the regulatory technical standards, etc. But I think for the listeners, the biggest one, I would say, is on timing. So DORA came into force in January 2023 with a 24-month implementation, which means by 17 January 25, it goes into full force. At the same time, the regulatory process continues, and it may not be, and Xiaoyi already hinted on this, it may not be until October 24 before we really have full clarity on what is in the DORA text. And this only leaves 3 months to reach compliance. So this is a challenge. We now, almost on a daily basis, I get customers reaching out to me to ask for what Microsoft is doing around DORA, what they should do around DORA. Sometimes they ask for contractual mappings, if you want, or an explanation how we contractually comply to DORAs. But at the same time, when I ask the question, what effectively in the contract do we need to change or do we need to adjust, they struggle to articulate it. And the main reason is, I think, the legislative process that's still ongoing. So at one end, we know there's changes needed, but the devil is in the details, and the details are not yet known. So this, I would say, is a very big challenge that we and our customers are currently facing. Opportunity-wise, it's certainly not all doom and gloom, and I'm very convinced we'll get a very positive outcome out of DORA in the longer term. Opportunity-wise, first of all, it will provide a more consistent and a more harmonized outcome across Europe. And in the past, this has always been a very good thing. The same happened with the EBA guidelines and EIOPA and ESMA guidelines. Initially, during the process, there was a lot of concern around how this raises the bar, essentially, for financial services institutions and for use of third-party services and cloud. But it turned out to accelerate the adoption of cloud. And this is now happening, I think, all over again. So the bar is being raised in terms of resiliency, in terms of cybersecurity and so on. But with the clarity on the regulation, usually this drives to some very positive and some good outcomes in the longer term. So I'm quite optimistic on the content of the DORA text, nonetheless.
No, and I think it's great that you mentioned the opportunities as well, and I hope that your customers see that as well in the markets. But now speaking about them, maybe for you, Xiaoyi, what are the areas that the market struggles the most in this entire DORA journey?
Mm-hmm. I would say the first one, as Tom just mentioned, is obviously the compliance deadline is quite short compared to the pages, more than 2,000 pages that we have in the regulation, that every text and requirement should be go through by the in-scope entities, and also think about already forward-looking, what are the actions behind? Because, gap assessment, as I just mentioned, is great, but at the end, you need to also implement them. And then when you're having all these requirements can be also overwhelming. And the second part, I would say, is to know your operating model. So Tom also mentioned at the very beginning about this use, which derives to this criticality, concept. So how important, how critical using this technology towards your functioning operating model. So because in the regulation, they also emphasize on the importance of having a comprehensive but as well exhaustive view of your operating model from resilience point of view, and including the processes supporting your daily operations. So what are the technology that you using? And then, of course, all of this is also for information exchange. So what are the data actually having exchange, store, etc. So, and most importantly, you also need to know when you look at it, all these processes, operations, and these exchanges, who are exactly the stakeholders, so internal and external. And this is really, I would say, big challenge for our entities here, because as you may know, our local market, the operating model is that certain activities have been outsourced, delegated, either to service provider in Luxembourg or outside of Luxembourg. So I think, really knowing who are they is not sufficient. You also need to know what exactly happening behind, meaning how they do this job for you on a daily basis. Is there anything that they also delegate, outsource to any parties outside? But again, it's not knowing only on paper. So really to know what are the interactions between them. And this is to understand the connectivity, dependencies that you have with them and they have with the other third parties. Another point, it's of course, it's know your third parties, as I just mentioned. So meaning that all the Tom also mentioned, this increasing change requests for the contract. This is also from the one of the requirements, the pillar, so of DORA, so the third party risk management. which derives also to a requirement that you need to have a full, complete register for all these IT service providers, and then much more detailed than compare which is required by our local circular, so the 22/806, the outsourcing circular. So knowing all this information, ask the information from your service provider on top of knowing them. So what I just mentioned, the operating model, it's a lot of workload. So I think, the exercise itself is not really difficult. It's just a matter of time and then resources. But having all this within, the remaining more or less 10 months, this is the big challenge, I would say. And then maybe just the last point, sorry, Carla. Then also the application proportionality principle, because Tom also very correctly mentioned at the beginning this risk-based approach. Proportionality principle is something very important considering the size and complexity of our local entities here, in particular the fund industry in Luxembourg.
Okay. To follow up on that, Tom, from your experience, what are the main requests and expectations from your clients?
Yeah. So I want to pick up a little bit on some of this kind of aligns to some of what Xiaoyi was just saying on the market struggles, which translates, of course, in these requests and expectations. So I think DORA, maybe let me start here. DORA will impact in so many areas. It's ICT risk management, incident reporting around resilience and resilience testing. There's going to be contractual there will be contractual implications. There will be a stronger oversight over third-party suppliers, etc., etc. So currently the requests to reflect this, we get very broad requests right now, most of them, but this is, I think, more point in time. Most of them are around the second batch of regulatory technical standards, which are still in the consultative process. So until March 4th, a lot of the conversation we're having is around things like threat-led penetration testing, just to give one example, and how this would work in practice. But as we go on, and as we move towards the summer, I think these conversations will change, and then we'll be more specifically having conversations I think so, and I expect so, around resilience, around how address various aspects around cybersecurity, around the reporting for incidents, etc. So a lot of these details become translated into customer questions, and then most specifically, how is Microsoft addressing these? How can we help customers in addressing these? So this is typically how these things evolve.
Xiaoyi, would you like to add something?
Yes, I think, Tom, what you just mentioned is fully aligned with, I would say, the main concerns we have heard from our clients as well. So this is incident management piece because, of course, they do have a majority of the local entities here. They do have an incident management process locally within their organization. But as I mentioned at the beginning, so that DORA, it's not only about looking at your organization. It's beyond that. So that's why we have this notion of third party. So parties, including service providers, etc. And then, so incident management, once you have this exhaustive view of your operating model, and this can be much more complex because maybe the issue that will be detected is not only under your control at the moment, the point in time that you identify it. So it can be also, at the very end of your value chain. It's outside of organization, even outside of your first level of service provider. And so knowing how your downstream different contractors can really giving you this information on time for you to be able to classify it and then afterwards to report to the regulator. This will be also another challenge, operational challenge on top of what we just mentioned. And then, of course, the contract part that Tom mentioned as well is that knowing which part of the contract you would like to amend it, and then how many of those contracts will be in scope of the regulation, and then how much time you also foreseen for that. This is again referring to what I mentioned, timing. So understand the regulation, knowing what to do is one part, but you also need to having sufficient time to prepare until the implementation deadline next year.
Now, to follow up on that point and to link back also to what you were saying earlier, Tom, how will you concretely support the financial services customers that will be regulated under DORA? Maybe you can share with us some of the services that Microsoft has considered or is actually considering offering in this context of DORA.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So I'd say quite many services or none, depending upon you look at it, or maybe our core online services is the answer, which is a core set of services which have a higher bar in terms of both compliance and contractual commitments. But yeah, let me take a step back here. So mostly under DORA, things are not new. As I've been saying before, I think it's more about the bar having been raised, and that is ultimately a good thing. So when it comes to financial service institutions, this becomes a conversation around strengthening resilience, cybersecurity, and ICT risk management. And this touches upon so many areas of your business. So it can be that they need to revise their strategy in general. And in terms of using of third-party suppliers, it's around the conversations around increasing the RTO, RPOs of your critical services, responding more agilely and better to incidents, including incidents from third-party suppliers, such as from a Microsoft or from subcontractors in general, getting visibility on the supply chain, etc., etc. I think we talked about these things quite a bit. So what this means for Microsoft is we will not create any specific services for DORA specifically. So this is not a good way to think about it. What we will do, though, is I'd say DORA aligns very well with our investments in cybersecurity. For instance, we at Microsoft are heavily investing in cybersecurity in general to safeguard all users and all assets from evolving threats. And so this wouldn't be unique to DORA or to Europe or to the financial service industry. So our strategy investments in this space with things like a security co-pilot and AI and many, I'd say, state-of-the-art innovations in this space are there for customers to consider and to use as they need to look at their cybersecurity and how they can strengthen that. So we are a provider for solutions, I'd say, in this space. And that is one aspect. The other aspect that I wanted to highlight maybe as well is the other thing you need to be mindful as a financial service entity, and again in general, is to increase your resilience overall, have less incidents, have a higher availability, higher SLA, etc. And a lot of banks, rightfully so, will look at cloud to do this, whether it's our cloud or competitors, but it's generally cloud solutions are usually considered the state of the art. They're evergreen. You don't have to worry about patchings, updates, etc. And so I think we realize this, but what we're now doing is trying to take that to the next level and make sure we strip out customers increasingly so in reaching 5 nines of SLAs, in making sure that all kinds of threat scenarios, from data center failures, from mistakes and changes, etc., that best practices are being applied across the board. And so we have a whole framework around this that we're applying in general, and we will have mappings to DORA. But ultimately, the engineering work and the work we're doing inside Microsoft will not be for DORA, it will be for the industry and then mapped to DORA. This is mostly how we approach regulations, and this is no exception.
So the next question goes for you, Tom, and it's about the new role of critical third-party service provider introduced by DORA. So how does Microsoft perceive it?
Thank you. As the Microsoft Cloud has been growing and maturing, we see the concept of cloud as part of critical infrastructure come up more and more in the private sector, but it's not new. I mean, we have been regulated, for instance, for the US government. We provide services for the US government, which have been very strictly regulated for government offerings. So this is not for for the private sector. But it is very similar, and we seem to be moving in the direction now in the financial service industry across a number of jurisdictions. But we understand this, and I mean, our own leadership, so Satya Nadella and Brad Smith, have been quite vocal about our commitments to our customers to enable, and this is our mission statement, essentially, to enable every individual and every organization on the planet to achieve more with our technology. And this is something I think that, like I said before, that fits very well under DORA, but it's not specifically done for DORA. So if you look at our investments into data center regions, which has been driven again by demand, in particular in financial service industry, we now have 60 regions, and that number is growing when it comes to investments in resilience, etc. Same thing. We recently updated our service delivery lifecycle practices, and all of these efforts are done, I think, to overall, I'd say, overall meet the expectation of financial service customers and other customers that the cloud is no more a playground, is really part of your critical environment, and it cannot go down. And we can talk about some of the incidents we've had. We're certainly not free of any failures or any mistakes, but we're heavily investing in making sure that whatever thing has happened in the past will not happen again in the future. So this is a very big focus. When it comes to the oversight, part of your question, I think we welcome it. We're internally getting ready to address it. And this would be more in general. The oversight may identify some areas for improvement. We see this as well with third-party penetration testing or with bug bounty programs, etc. We welcome all of this because if we can improve, we will certainly make our efforts to realize these improvements, because ultimately we are aligned with our customers. We want to be the most resilient service, and the customers want us to have the most resilient service. So we have a common goal in this one.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
No, and I think it's great. I mean, of course, getting ready and prepared for a regulation is always a tough journey. But I think it's great that you emphasize also on the opportunities and the good things it will bring to the market. So maybe on that positive note, as the episode is coming to an end, maybe both of you can share with our listeners maybe your advice and maybe messages that you want them to remember from this podcast. I don't know who wants to start.
Yeah, maybe I can go first, and I'll be very brief. But when it comes to, and I've stated this before, but I think it's for me, it's the most important point in closing: regulatory clarity and regulatory harmonizations are two things that will follow from DORA. And this has always led to positive outcomes in the past, and I think it will be the same now. So it will lead to just a better environment, more resilience, more clarity, and ultimately it will grow or continue to grow the environment into the 21st century. There's a lot of opportunity for financial institutions to leverage cloud technologies and any latest technologies in a way that is fully compliant with DORA. And I think ultimately, this will bring a more, I'd say, a better and more sophisticated outcome rather than the reverse. I know a lot of people worry deeply about DORA and about concentration risk, to name some terms or things like that, but having less concentration and not having any subcontracting as a result of this as a measure to deal with it would not be a good strategy, because ultimately in the long run that will not be sustainable. I think the better approach is to embrace it and find ways to do this in the best possible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So I took also an liberty to use the advice from our local regulator. So first of all, for this DORA regulation, of course, the involvement and accountability of the management body of all the in-scope entities is expected. And as well, maybe from the project perspective, so prioritize the area related to the critical function and processes that we also mentioned during this episode. And then as well, do not underestimate the workload required for, this completion of a third-party register. In addition to that, I just want to also emphasize that, again, this regulation is not only a purely IT topic, but you need to also know the joint force from the business operation teams. And then, of course, this is a regulation indeed, but they can also derive to operational IT transformation opportunity that Tom also mentioned during our episode, because it's also kind of having a more fresh view about your operating model, about the technology that you use, and then you can also take this opportunity derive it to this transformation view. And then the very last one, so do not be overwhelmed by the 200 pages of regulation in this IT terminology, because as a matter of fact, so IT is embedded in our daily life. So we're using IT every day, and without being IT specialists, so it's closer than you believe. And then I think for the remaining more or less 10 months, the to-do will be have a detailed plan. So look at it, the different topics, have a detailed plan, and then already look at it, the role and responsibility if you can leverage on the something from the group, within organization, etc. And then allocate the resources and of course the time. So this is, I think, the to-do that I will recommend. Tom, I do have a bonus question for you. So because we mentioned about this regulation, etc., how do you see the role of consultants in this resiliency ecosystem?
Right. So Microsoft, in first instance, we're really a vendor of cloud and software solutions, but it can be challenging for banks to navigate the complexity. So if you need to architect and implement a really resilient solution across, whether it's multi-cloud or hybrid or full cloud, the complexity is often not to be underestimated, and a lot of issues actually follow from mistakes. And I think this is where consultancy is really very important. So we would strongly recommend financial service institutions across the world to let themselves be guided and helped in implementing these newest technologies and in their innovation journeys in general. And this is where they could partner up. Within Microsoft, for instance, we have a consultancy practice as well, but this is very focused on, of course, Microsoft as a provider and our technologies. A lot of banks are in reality using many other services, and so this is where partners such as PwC also have a very strong consultancy services that can bring expertise from within the bank. I'll look at it from a different level, and it doesn't have to be one or the other very often. And I think actually in most cases there's a partnership between some Microsoft consulting and then some third-party consulting of the house provider, I'd say, in many of these financial services institutions. But yeah, besides, so at one end you have the technology, at the other end you have the rules. But the third thing we haven't really talked about a lot is you have to implement it in a successful way, and doing that is a complex thing where I think consultants have a significant role to play in delivering expertise and advice. Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, I guess we are just in the beginning stages of this DORA journey, and let's see where it takes all the parties involved. Hopefully, the opportunities will show to be bigger than the challenges, and the challenges will be easily overcome. Thanks so much for having us, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom, for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.
And that's all for today. This is Tech Talk, technology made simple over a cup of coffee. Don't miss out on any future episodes by hitting subscribe. Thank you for listening to this episode, and see you in the next one.